I'm starting the recording now. And so as we go along, if you have any questions, feel free to enter your questions in the chat box. But we will reserve questions until both speakers have had their chance to give their short presentations, with a break in between the two speakers in case anybody has any immediate needs for clarification or urgent questions. But general questions, we'll be holding those until after both speakers. But if you have something come to mind so you don't forget, feel free to enter it in the chat box because we'll be monitoring that and saving those questions. So like I said, my name is Amber Huff. I'm a political ecologist based in the UK at the Institute of Development Studies. And I've been a member of the UK-based Kurdistan Solidarity Movement for quite some time. And I'm a member of the PIK Kurdistan Ecology Network Steering Group. And Connor, would you like to introduce yourself as co-chair?
Sure, thank you. My name is Connor Hayes. I presently live in the United Kingdom. I come from a background in philosophy and political theory, and I work with PIK Kurdistan. Thank you.
Estella, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, very briefly, Estella, I'm the co-founder of the PIK Kurdistan campaign, a network set up in '94 to build a global network alliance of specific people, from starting with activists, lawyers, politicians, trade unions, etc. It is not, I want to point out, a solidarity campaign, but made it its business to work closely with the Kurdish freedom movement and also the PKK.
All right.
Briefly. Okay.
Who would like to go next?
All right. Well,
you can choose
Dana, please, from Tübingen University.
Hello. Hello. Yes, I think you choose me because I'm a new face. So yeah. Hello, I'm Dana Peach from Germany, and I'm with the Peace in Kurdistan campaign just for the Iran Rojhelat news briefings for some months. And I came into the topic since I started to work with the refugees since 4 years, and I have a special interest in Kurdistan. And originally I'm coming from physical geography, soil science. So what I'm interested in is all around ecology, social science, from an academic, but also from a grassroots point of view. I'm happy to be here.
Very good. Thank you so much. Well, maybe we call a Nogmunda. Okay.
Maybe Felix?
Okay, shall I go next? I'm very excited to be here today because a lot of friends from India are here. So I'm an anthropologist. I live in Wales, from London originally. I have worked on especially indigenous issues, but also for Kurdish issues with Estella for over 25 years. And very excited about the possibility of real solidarity between India and Kurdistan specifically, because in my work, I've lived more in India and worked more in India, but I'm in Wales now. So thank you.
Yes, my name is Ögmundur Jónasson, and I come from Iceland, former trade unionist and institutional politician, now a grassroots politician, which is much better, and a full-time grandfather, doing something of use, the first time in my life probably. I've been active in the international initiative, Freedom for Öcalan, Peace in Kurdistan, for some years, and in other activities as well. I am friends with Felix, who just spoke here, and Jeff Miley, and Hayes, Connor Hayes, and Estella, of course. So I know some of you, but here at this seminar, I will be a listener mainly and a student.
Thank you. Anybody else you can call on? Or no? Connor? Hello?
How about Sarah?
Jeff?
Hi, I'm Sarah Glynn. I'm in Strasbourg, where I help the HDP in Strasbourg and work with the Kurdish community and write regular articles, particularly for Media News. And previously I was a co-convener of Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan.
Welcome. Jeff?
Oh, sorry, I should nominate somebody. So Munir?
Hi, I'm Jihan from Rojava. We are from GreenTress Initiative. We are a group of Kurdish people. We aim to turn Rojava green. And we are going to make a presentation about our initiative.
Very nice to meet you.
And I thank you. And I have he's here, Ziwer. He's the executive manager of GreenTress, and he doesn't know English. So I'm gonna translate for him. Thank you for your all.
Thank you so much. Welcome. Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Jeff Miley, a lecturer of political sociology at the University of Cambridge. I focus on struggles for self-determination. I'm a member of the executive committee of the EUTCC and a patron of Peace in Kurdistan. I work closely with grassroots movements in Kenya and am living currently actually in Malaysia. So who else is here? How about Les?
Okay, hello. Yes, I'm Les. I have worked with Stella and Sally for the last 2 decades on campaigns against the so-called anti-terror laws in Britain and for self-determination of the groups being targeted by those laws. Wearing my academic hat, I do research on agroecology movements in South America, where they tried to build a solidarity economy on that basis.
I've just seen that Sharanya has gone, which is a great shame because she's got to catch a train. She's my friend from Orissa, who is going to speak today about the movements in Orissa, but she may be able to join from her mobile from the train. So is Sharanya, are you still there or have you gone?
She's gone, I think.
Then let's go on introducing ourselves.
Saleh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, my name is Saleh. I worked with Estella over a decade and with Les as well, with campaign against criminalized communities. My current interests are about self-determination and resistance movements, particularly in Sudan. And I'm really interested in the politics of underdevelopment across the world and the global south. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Hi. Hi, yes. When I stop croaking. I'm Nick Hilliard. I work with a small solidarity and mutual learning group called Corner House. I've been working in solidarity with the Kurdish movement for 20 years or more. And I've been working recently a lot on water issues in the Mesopotamian basin, and trying to facilitate discussions between those in Rojava on water harvesting with groups in India who have been practicing water harvesting to restore watersheds and so on, but also on bringing political pressure on Turkey to stop militia, the Turkish army and Turkish militia from stopping water pumping from Aluk pumping station, which is causing big water shortages in around Hasaki.
We don't have Ercan here, Ercan Aboga, no. Yes.
Not yet.
Uh-huh.
Lon Jaman, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
So, sorry, I am Jihad,
Oh,
but I'm using my friend's cell phone. That's why he's not there. Yeah. So I'm Jihad. I'm from Kobani, and I'm a member of steering community in the Peace in Kurdistan, and I just helped to organize this meeting and facilitate it. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think, Steve, you're the last one for now.
Hi, yeah, so I'm just, I was running late today as I warned you beforehand, so I'm just getting myself ready. Yeah, so I'm Steve Hunt. I'm part of the steering committee of the steering group of the Peace in Kurdistan Ecology Group. Sorry, I'm just not quite in focus there, am I? Recent thing I've been involved with is editing the book about ecological solidarity in the Kurdish freedom movement. I'm also a member of the Bristol Radical History Group. We have our annual festival next week, which is we normally get more than 1,000 people along to that. So it's so here in Bristol, that's quite a big event for sort of political community outreach. And in terms of Kurdish issues, I'm very interested in social ecology and agriculture at the moment. So that's what I'm currently my main focus of interest in this area presently. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There is Sonia also, who is not introduced.
Sonia, hi. Sorry. I missed you because you're on the top row for me.
Not at all. I'll introduce in a moment anyway. My name is Sonia. I have a degree in English literature, focusing on colonialism and the impact thereof. I work as part of KJAR, which is the Free Women's Society of Rojhelat, that's Eastern Kurdistan. And I will be giving a brief summary of the environmental and ecological disasters happening at the moment in Eastern Kurdistan today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Connor, I'll hand it over to you now.
Great, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us. So before I introduce the speakers, Estella asked me if I could give a brief overview and analysis of this group and this meeting in particular, because as we are the Peace in Kurdistan Ecology Group, and this is our first meeting devoted specifically to ecology issues in Kurdistan, I will just try to give a brief general overview of the current situation and hope to not be too repetitive or obvious about it. So as we all know, the ecological crisis is worsening and in a manner wrapped up with the deepening of the systemic crisis in general, with issues spiraling off of one another, resource shortage and wars, refugees and migration, social unrest, political economic crisis, and so on. And as the situation worsens, we are seeing the increasing consciousness and radicalization of peoples everywhere, including in the industrialized core countries or the first world, spurred by the unwillingness and incapacity of capitalist states to take the necessary steps to curb their emissions and extractive practices. So there are two key points from this. The first is that understanding that ecology is essential and connects all people of the globe beyond state borders, and an increasing looking by the people of the first world to the marginalized periphery and global south, who constitute the vast majority of humanity, with the understanding that they are and have been on the front lines of these struggles, which contribute to the conditions for a broad-based internationalist alliance. And the second is that in these conditions, there's an implicit and growing anti-capitalist sentiment and belief in the necessity for revolutionary system change, with the understanding that capitalist modernity's infinite growth model is unsustainable and is responsible for bringing us to this point. And further, that large corporations and capitalist states are unwilling to move against their own profit interests to cease these activities regardless of the catastrophic consequences. So when we look to Kurdistan, ecological struggles are not new. Waters, dams, land, forests, agriculture, and so on, as we'll be hearing more about from our speakers. But I just want to make a couple of general points that we see in Kurdistan, but that also resonate across the world, namely that ecological struggles are entangled with geopolitics and the struggle over the land itself for the people to continue living on the land and determining what their life looks like on the land, which shows ecology is a central issue for self-determination, which is something that we at Peace in Kurdistan focus on. And further, that self-determination must mean the capacity for peoples to define what development means for them. And on that basis, determine as a society how to interact with land, water, and other living beings. So I just want to make a final point or two about the program of democratic confederalism, the ideology of the system of the Kurdish movement, considers ecology as one of its central pillars, taking inspiration from social ecology, which departs from the perspective that the social and natural worlds are not separable. I won't go into detail, but I want to mention that as a program for self-determination beyond the state, confederalism's emphasis on democratic autonomy at all levels encourages people to develop sustainable self-sufficiency to the extent possible, while never forgetting that they are part of an interconnected whole. So it is a program of social resiliency and vibrancy, which are so crucial in times of ecological catastrophe. Confederalism also describes itself as a program for social self-defense. And the ecological dimension of this is key, both to stay on the land against efforts by corporations and states to remove people or devastate the land, as well as to build sustainable self-sufficiency and decrease reliance on external actors for the basic necessities of survival. And the strength of this program is spoken to by organic parallels to people's self-organizations around the world and across history, which both Öcalan and Bukçin speak to in the context of their respective home regions. I want to just mention briefly also, we see, thanks in large part to the great work of Dr. Miley from Peace in Kurdistan, who mentioned before, who is here with us today, the Confederalist program is being taken up by organizations around the world now, particularly in Nairobi, Kenya, where peoples of the slums are working to, among other things, increase their ecological well-being and sustainability of the area under the heading of the Grassroots Liberation Network. So finally, a note on this group. Peace in Kurdistan has, since its inception in 1994, been involved in campaigning on ecological issues. And through the course of its work, it has found that ecological issues have a particular capacity to make connections with other peoples and movements because they are issues that everyone faces and can relate to. An understanding that's only deepening as the ecological crisis worsens. So in the global context that I mentioned before, organizing in the sphere of ecological issues is crucially important in this moment and represents a possible basis to develop connections with people and formulate a collective vision for deeper change. So we've had a number of meetings of the Peace in Kurdistan Ecology Group thus far, but this is the first one devoted specifically to Kurdistan and the Kurdish movement. So we thought it might be helpful to give this brief overview in the global context and global scope, which this group aspires to. So with that, I want to turn it over to our speakers. First, Sonia, if you want to speak first, is that all right? Sonia said briefly already she holds a BSc in English Literature with an emphasis on colonialism, is a member of the Peace in Kurdistan Ecology Network Steering Group, and works with the community of free women of Rojhelat or KJAR. Sonia, in her talk, will focus on the ecological situation and resistance in Iranian Kurdistan or Rojhelat. Sonia, thank you very much for speaking with us. Over to you.
Very much for introducing me. I'm just going to share my screen. Right, here we are. Gosh, hang on, this isn't working. Can't
Have you tried to begin your slideshow?
Where does that begin? Is that...
there should be an icon at the bottom of your screen that looks like kind of a projection screen or says slideshow.
Slideshow is at the top. At the top, if you look, yeah.
So I'm going to begin by talking about the water crisis and the unregulated and mismanaged systems that are in place at the moment. Prior to the Iranian Revolution, the water distribution was managed via a maze of qanats, That's the example that you can see here in the image. They're similar to ancient Roman aqueducts, which can be environmentally friendly, provided they are regulated. However, since the Iranian Revolution, that has changed significantly. While Iran still uses these qanats, there is a significant difference. There are an estimated 500,000 deep and shallow wells, many of which are illegal with no regulations. The water then graduates downwards from the top of these qanats, which is at the top of the mountains, via vertical shaft and is delivered to the surface via gravity. The water is then distributed through a succession of strategically placed dams. Now, it's these dams that have made the difference. The impact of these dams in Iran has been significant and negative. They've produced substantial shrinkage in water bodies and reduction in downstream access to water. That means that most of this water is being reserved or is being displaced elsewhere. Downstream, where the agricultural plains are, is now significantly less water. As we can see from the numbers, there's 588 current dams, 137 are under construction, and there's plans for 546 more dams. What we can see in this next slide is the gradual process of change that has occurred in Lake Urmia. Lake Urmia in 2002, as you can see, it's one of the biggest water bodies in Iran, and it's shrunk by 70%, in particular over the last 5 years. Only a few decades ago, Iran had one of the greenest lands in the Middle East, and now it's one of the largest lakes, which you can see in the world. Actually, Urmia has shrunk 70%. Recent research shows that the natural wetlands of Zedabar are also damaged by excessive use of pesticides, which increase the volume of toxic algae blooms that cause eutrophication in the water. Essentially, this means the water becomes uninhabitable for organisms, for life. This also emits an enormous amount of carbon dioxide and changes the level of the pH water. So not only is this damaging for the environmental life of the organisms, of the aquamarine life and all that sort of thing, it's also damaging in terms of the soil, the surrounding areas. So again, it damages soil and makes it impossible for agriculture to continue in those areas. And the Iranian government has been known to create forest fires. This one is the most recent one in Zedabar in December, where basically fire. Essentially, these people are civilians. They're forced to go there and put out the fires on their own because the Iranian government will not help them, will not support them, and will not send any aid. They'll set fires, they'll shell areas. Last year, they started shelling the Shahor Mountains, which has been given international recognition and protection because of its natural habitat that it provides for the environment. If we go further and talk about these fires between May 2019 and May 2021, fires were set all across the Zagros Mountains, set by the Iranian military. At the same time, there was a fire in Turkey, and Iran sent a helicopter there to aid them in putting out the fires while ignoring their own fires in this region. And that's particularly because that part that they're setting fire to, that part that they're damaging, is Western Kurdistan, which is Western Iran, which is called Eastern Kurdistan. And therefore, one can see that this is essentially a form of genocide via ecocide, displacing the people, making the place uninhabitable for agriculture, for survival, essentially. Where there's no water, the people cannot survive. Again, these people have been forced to put out 990 hectares of forest fires, with leaf blowers, by hand, by towels, by bringing buckets of water. Places such as Dejevnav and Palanjan and Kamiran have been burning for days. There have been an estimated 258 forest fires in the last 6 months. And then, of course, there's the human cost of this catastrophe. As the environment degrades and the water crisis escalates, people have begun to protest against the government. In Kurdistan region, there have been daily protests described as the uprising of the first day. Protests started in the 15th of July 2020 and have been ongoing intermittently since. And they've quickly turned political and have spread to other provinces too, simply because there is a total lack of water. People don't have access to basic amenities because of it. As a result, in southern Iran, which is part of the Kurdistan region, 70 villages have been evacuated, which means that there is an increase in migration. That's a refugee crisis on its own. In Western Kurdistan, over hundreds of villages. It's over the past 40 years, hundreds of villages have been flooded to make way for dams. Those that are left are often facing droughts, soil erosion. Life has become almost impossible in Western Kurdistan, and as a result, people are forced to become kolber. Kolber is basically a person that carries enormous weights on their back from the Iraqi border or the Turkish border into Iran, carrying illegal goods have been sanctioned. So the work itself is illegal, but they're carrying hundreds of kilograms of these enormous goods on their backs, and they're facing being shot by the IRGC, by the Iraqi military, by the Turkish military. In April alone, 55 Kolber were killed. 15 environmental activists have been detained. So it's not just a case of there's not enough protests. It's a case of these people's lives are at risk, whether they protest or don't protest. It's a case of the life in Western Iran, Rojhelat, is becoming impossible to sustain. Sorry, one moment, I'm just moving forward. The Iranian government also has its reach abroad. That means that whether you're in England, in Germany, anywhere in the world, and you're protesting against this, you often face harassment, and your life is at risk on a daily basis for raising awareness of this. There isn't enough information to describe the level of damage that has been caused by the Iranian government over the last 40 years, simply because they won't allow that information to escape. When previously confronted about the water shortage in Kurdistan and the shrinkage of water body in Urmia, the government totally gave a wrong estimate of how much has been shrunk. They said that only about 20% of the water has shrunk, and that's natural. When you look at satellite images that I showed in the previous slides, that shows that that's a lie. And then it comes down to international pressure. We really do need to be thinking about ways to navigate this water crisis internationally. Öcalan argues that eventually we won't be fighting over oil, we will be fighting over water. To this end, we need to discuss this now rather than later. How do we manage this? How do we manage countries such as Iran? Because Iran isn't alone in a dictatorship, and dictatorships are the ones that are causing an enormous amount of ecological damage, because they refuse to hire people that have scientific awareness. And that's predominantly because of businesses. a lot of these dams that are being built right now in Iran are being built by businesses. They're being built right now about 300,000 tons of water on a daily basis are being sent to Isfahan just for the purpose of a museum garden. About 420,000 tons of water on a daily basis are being sent to Basra from Iran, just so that they can manage getting more political sway in Iraq. The regulations just aren't sufficient, and I believe that we do need to be talking about this more. I do believe that we need to be talking about how we manage our communication with dictatorships. How do we navigate this situation? Because once the water is gone, it is gone. The water table in Rojhelat, that means water from below the surface, so that's mountain water coming from right below, it's drying out. There is an estimate that about 25% of the water table from the basin has dried out. That basically means desertification. Those areas where they dry out become desert. And Iran is increasingly facing a problem where much of its land is becoming a desert. Again, we do need to be discussing this. We do need to be discussing how we're going to approach international players about this situation. Water crisis is spreading. It's not just a Middle Eastern issue. It's not just an Asian issue. This is an issue that is spreading into the West, and we do need to be prepared, and we do need to be approaching this from that angle. So I believe that's all that I've prepared for today. And thank you for listening.
Well done.
Excellent, really excellent. Thanks so much. Thanks. Really good.
Yes, very good. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sonia. So now I'll just turn it over to our second speaker, and then we'll open up for discussion after that. If everyone's all right with that, and questions. So our second speaker is the GreenTress Initiative, who's an ecological organization based in Rojava, north and east Syria, who have been involved in numerous ecological campaigns in the area, including especially developing tree nurseries and reforestation efforts. And they will tell us more about their work now. Thank you very much for being with us.
Hello again. We're going to share our screen.
I've made you a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay. We welcome all people that are hearing us now from Rojava, Kurdistan. And thank you, thanks for the Peace Network in Kurdistan for the efforts made to shed light on the policy of genocide against the Kurdish community with all its cultural, environmental, and geographical characteristics. Turkey, Iraq, and Iran, Iraq and Syria are developed countries after Second World War. I will first talk to you about the Green Terraces environmental initiative, which we borrowed the name in our initiative, reminding of the 5,000 of our mothers and sisters who were taken captive from Shangal and then sold in slave markets in Mosul, Raqqa, and Idlib. Sorry. And an appreciation for the pioneering role that Kurdish women played in building and managing society under democratic self or autonomous administration. Indigenous people and how they target nature in Kurdistan as a part of targeting the Kurdish national identity, in addition to some notes on how to continue save the land in Kurdistan. Many factors have had a negative impact on the environment and biodiversity, leading to an ecological imbalance in them and have had an impact on public health with higher rates of respiratory and heart disease and an increase in the rate of cancer. And the world is ripe for disease and epidemics. Syria in general, and particularly Northeast Syria, has a share of this environmental suffering, especially in recent years where wars and subsequent fires of forests, crops, cutting thousands of trees have led to deterioration of water resources as well as unwary and irresponsibility use of oil resources and the use of primitive roads and other reasons for the deterioration of environment in Al Jazeera region, where recent statistics revealed high rates of respiratory and malignant diseases in this region compared to whole country. With the difficulty of securing health services, this poses a threat to the region both environmentally and healthily. Therefore, believing in the pursuit of healthy environment, need to participate in protecting our environment, natural resources, and creating collaborative relationship between human being and natural resources away from the principle of higher or bigger profit at the expense of the environment. We understand the need to launch awareness raising an initiative to alert the threat to the region. As a group of volunteers, activists, and academicians is interested in the environmental issue, we established the Environment GreenTress Association. GreenTress Association is a development association concerned with public environmental affairs and issues and non-governmental and non-profit organization working inside and outside Syria. It includes environment and agriculture specialists and academicians, as well as volunteers and civil society activists interested in the environment, launched in October 2020. The objectives of the GreenTress affiliation. GreenTress launched the 4 Million Trees campaign that aimed to producing 4 million seedlings over a 5 years period of time. Environment protection and development. Increasing green space 10% of the total area of Northeast Syria. Preserving healthy ecosystem and biodiversity. Contributing to reduce the deterioration of the general climate. Working on spreading environmental culture and developing environmental awareness. Working to establish database and environmental statistics network. Achieving community participation in environmental development, achieving sustainable environmental development in Northeast Syria. Target regions, accepting from the GreenTress that sound environmental action on any geographical area of the planet reflects positively on the entire world and improves the overall environment situation. We have adopted work in a coordination with governmental and non-governmental environmental stakeholders in all regions of Northeast Syria and Syria in general, in schools, universities, administrative institutions, industrial reserve forces, forests, and MBT agricultural area that can be deforestation and natural reserves threatened with shrinking areas. Execution instrument and work. Production seedlings in the specified seasons. taking the media as a means to create an environmental culture in society, conduct environmental and social campaigns and seminars to introduce the advantage of a healthy environment and the need to contribute to its protection. Communicating with regional, international, and local government agencies, environmental organizations, and associations with the aim of obtaining support, establishing relationships that may conclude agreements, and adhering to agreements that serve the global environment issue. The participation of community groups in projects to achieve community participation in the region. We call on all local and international governments, associations, and civil society organizations interested in environment affairs, as well as citizens within the community, to cooperate and support the GreenTress project to contribute achieving the desired goals, whether materially or morally. The policy of extermination in Kurdistan and nature. When talking about Kurdistan, we must point out that we are talking about Mesopotamia, according to Greek name, and two rivers, that Tigris and Euphrates, an ancient region located in Eastern Mediterranean, where it is bordered by the Zagros mountain from the northeast and the Arab plateau from the southeast. Iran, Syria, and Turkey are located in Mesopotamia region as well. And this region was called in the past as Fertile Crescent, and it is fertile plains in the past were the site of many civilizations, such as those of Akkad, Sumer, Babylon, and Assyrian. Mesopotamia civilization. The civilization of Mesopotamia was rich in many languages and cultures, as its history was divided into many periods and eras, and it did not possess geographical units or permanent capital, which helped in the cultural diversity in it. The region is rich and fertile due to its proximity to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which brought the area soil and surface water, which made the dependence of its population mainly on agriculture, where men and women worked alike and people lived in small gatherings or groups. In this, we find the absolute majority of colonies in this area are on the banks of Tigris and Euphrates and their tributaries. From this simple description, we realize that this area was biodiversity and the season fluctuated moderately, providing life in ideal atmosphere. But about 100 years ago, things began to change. The beginning of national regimes using water as a weapon in the face of the local population, especially the Kurds, where Turkey worked to use this weapon in the process of ethnic cleansing. The ideas came with the breath of the nationalist state in Turkey to benefit from the waters of Tigris and Euphrates River by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of Turkey Republic. Therefore, the Department of Electrical Studies was established in 1936 to study the extent to which rivers could be used within the state to generate electricity. The administration started its studies with the Kibankol Dam project, then joined the Southeast and Anatolia project. In Turkish, it is known by the short form GAP, which is a project that worked on building 23 dams and tunnels on the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. The project was completed by 2010 at a cost of $32 billion. The Turkish dams flooded the entire extended and perhaps the most famous of all the historic cities of Hussein Cave. We have photo. During these years, as the wars launched by Turkey against the Kurdish people and the failure to provide services to the Kurdish area contributed to migration towards large cities such as Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir. The Ba'ath government in Syria also used the pretext of building dams and carrying out demographic changes by establishing a belt of settlements for the Arab population in the Kurdish land, some 10 kilometers on the border separating Syria and Turkey. These Syria policies were subordinated and complementary to this day to the policies of Turkey. Hundreds of years of war in Kurdistan, massive use of weapons and deliberate burning of the natural forests in the mountains of Kurdistan to prevent the revolutionaries from taking advantage of vegetation cover as a way to hide from the plains, where the state prevents the state agencies and its army in many cases from putting out fires with their own capability, but even arrests those who work in this ground. Rojava, Kurdistan, according to some studies, was entered by 108 rivers and watery galaxies from North Kurdistan, Turkey, in the second of Euphrates River and continues to decline, whereas according to the signed agreement, the following quantities should reach 500 cubic meters per second. The Syrian government, for its part, had distributed geographical areas according to production diversity and turned the Kurdish area into areas of wheat production as a strategic crop and pastoral manners, and prevented the planting of trees, but rather eliminated those who initiated the planting of trees. How does the GreenTress Initiative enter the self-management service? Self-management is distinguished from the nationalist governments that the wisdom of the people of Middle East is based on being based in ideological and philosophical foundation, namely democracy, freedom of the women, and the environment. Consequently, the political discourse based on environment values, even if it was presented at a difficult time in the history of the regions of Rojava, Kurdistan, due to the state terrorism and invasion, in addition to terrorist attacks. But this discourse made the environment issue constantly presented. We took advantage of this point in the work, and therefore we demand the local administration to commit more to environment values in the management of resources and or investments in relation to nature resource. Perhaps the local authorities did not expect that a group of young men, women would voluntarily launch an initiative of this kind and manage a project at a cost of $100,000. In a project, the departments concerned with the environment disgrace in the autonomous administration were affected by the experience of green terraces, which formed an initiative for its employees or volunteers that they can work with simple capabilities as it is the case with the initiators of green terraces to constitute a kind of positive competition, according to what responsible and influential sources in the autonomous administration told us, saying that you raised from the environment file in our priority scale, as it can be said hypothetically that it was carrying the number 70 in our table. We, with the reality of the difficulty living and serving conditions in the world. So, brought to the top 10 of the administration's agenda, most of the pioneers of social network sites consider that this project comes in second place after the formation of self-protection forces that fought terrorism. So we found that the self-management as well as the local community with all its national religion, culture, diversity will come the step. How we can contribute to environment development in Rojhelat, Kurdistan. Given the aforementioned explanation of the destructive policies of the environment by the Syrian and Turkish government in the Kurdish areas in particular, we are in a very critical situation where the vegetation cover does not exceed 1.5% and the water places have disappeared in addition to the depletion of groundwater and the unjust policies in investing. Okay, as we don't have much time, we're going to move to the. We are looking forward to owning a laboratory for planting tissues so that we can provide types that are resistant to weather and pests in the region, in addition to the economic quality that the trees produced in this way can contain. We also look forward to being part of the alliances and organization of international nature working in the field of environment, so that we have the opportunity to form knowledge that enhances capability of our teams in sensitive scientific terms. We are like the required quantities of seeds as we are besieged by the Damascus or Syrian government, which prevent the seeds from reaching us. We are managing some machines that may contribute to completion of our project in the production of seedlings and the manufacturing of organic fertilizer. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful, and thank you again very, very much for being with us today to speak with us. Thank you. And so with that, we'll open it up for questions. If anyone has any, and discussion.
Yes, I'd like to ask both speakers how you might see the major power that is playing a colonial or neo-colonial role. That's all.
Sorry, could you clarify that question for a second? I don't know if I got a grasp of it.
Well, both of you have described the degradation of natural resources.
Yeah.
Either intentional or indirectly resulting from their actions, such as building dams. So I want to ask how you see that that oppressive power is playing a colonial or a neo-colonial role?
To colonize space doesn't necessarily mean that you physically have to have a physical presence in that space. It can simply be taking something that doesn't belong to you or degrading the space to a stage where the people cannot live there anymore. In terms of colonialism in Rojhelat, now I'm Kurdish, I speak Kurdish, I have Kurdish culture, I am Kurdish, that's it. It's not part of Iran. And yet Iran has taken that part and abused it, not just abused it, but committed mass genocide and ecocide in that space for the purpose of its own gains. And its own gains don't make any political sense at all. It's just profiteering. This wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Sykes-Picot. This wouldn't have happened if the English didn't just march in and decide, oh, do you know what we're going to do? We're just going to put a line here and a line there. This is a consequence of them sitting down over 100 years ago and deciding this. Now, the worst part is that they may no longer be the superpowers they once were, but we're still suffering the effects of it. And to that end, they're not doing enough internationally to condemn this or to, in some way, alleviate some of the problems that there are. If we think about it, the embargoes and the sanctions that are in place on Iran aren't actually affecting the people in power. They're affecting the civilians. The civilians are the ones suffering. If we look at Kurdistan, and as a Rojhelati person, I can only speak for Kurdistan. If I look at Rojhelat, the numbers of people that have become Kurd, it's not just men, it's women, it's children, forced to carry these heavy loads simply because their land is no longer sustainable to live in. We've got an estimated 2.5 billion tons of soil that has been lost to erosion in the last 2 years alone. And England is profiting from this because oil, because they need tactical support in the region. There's simply, I mean, we do recognize that denying water is a war crime, but it's happening. It's not just happening in Rojhelat, it's happening in Rojava, and nothing is actually being done about it. I mean, other than being recognized as a war crime, nothing's actually being done about it. It is a direct impact of colonialism. It's not a question, it's not something that is still being debated. It is a fundamental impact of colonialism. And where there has been colonialism or neo-colonialism, you can see the same impacts. I mean, we can look at Brazil, we can look at the Amazon forest, we can look at India, we can look at Kashmir, we can look at Balochistan, Sistan. Anywhere you look where there has been colonialism, the damage is irreparable in some cases, and not just irreparable, but nothing is being done to alleviate it, to talk with these leaders. It is enormously a part of privilege, to be honest, because they're so privileged in the West that they can't feel the effects of water scarcity yet. Over the last year, because of the Ukrainian war, people have been complaining about the rise in oil and gas prices and things like that. So it's only just starting to hit people that what it means scarcity, but not to the extent that people in Asia, the Middle East, not to the extent that they're feeling it there.
Very good.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Maybe we can go ahead and take a few questions and then give both of the speakers a chance to respond as they like. So Stephen, I think you were next.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Sonia. I mean, yeah, Sonia did start to address. I popped the question into the chat in the end, actually, but it was really the question that Sonia started to address anyway. It was around the question of international sanctions upon the agricultural and the water system that Sonia's been describing, and really how that complicates the situation further. So Sonia has started to speak to that. I'll have one or two questions for our GreenTress representative, but I'll let other people ask questions, perhaps around Rojhelat first of all as well. Thank you.
Okay, Sarah, you had your hand up. Sarah Glenn.
Yes. Not so much Rojhelat actually, though obviously that's very true as well. But what I'm just perpetually amazed at how little it's publicized, the impact of how Turkey is cutting the water in the Euphrates. I mean, it's such a big thing, and one reads so little about it. And even on sort of charities that work on water, they kind of like avoid talking about this major issue because it's politically inconvenient. And I'm just wondering why a lot more isn't made of it. And clearly we need to know lots more, to hear lots more about what's happening in Rojhelat altogether, because actually the coverage of anything that happens in Iran is so slight with Iran. It's really quite frightening, as I'm just sure you're very aware. So, why actually is there not more emphasis on the cutting of the water, on this very deliberate cutting of the water by Turkey and also by Iran?
Thanks. And let's get one more question and then give you a chance to respond. So Dimitri, would you like to ask your question? Your microphone's not on, sorry.
I want to ask a question and make a comment, if I may. To what extent does the campaign to raise awareness about this whole situation, to what extent is there a contact with Greenpeace, especially Greenpeace International? The reason why I asked this question is because, as you all know, yesterday, World Social Forum concluded its meeting in Mexico City. And one of the major questions that was discussed in and around the forum, where there were thousands of participants, was the major water crisis in Mexico. And they recently had a extensive demonstration from village to village throughout Mexico, bringing attention to that question. It was quite dramatic and quite interesting. And Greenpeace is playing a role in Mexico to make the question of the major water crisis in Mexico known at the international level. So that's the point of my question to our wonderful speakers of today. And my comment is that given the paucity of information out there on what is going on and why, obviously international action is needed. And what I would add to our discussion is the possibility of using June 5, which is United Nations World Environment Day, where actions are being taken throughout the planet on that particular day, whether we here at this event, plus others, can combine our forces to bring this particular question that has been discussed here today at another level of discussion and debate and awareness during that day.
All right, so would any of the speakers like to respond to those questions? So we have one on why not more attention, I guess, I assume international attention on the water issues, and any linkages to Greenpeace around the water issues.
زيور متى دخوازي برسبجي بديت. Is Zero still in the chat?
Yes.
Well,
we might have a bad connection.
Yeah, maybe. I'll respond briefly to the one regarding Turkey. Indeed, what we do find often is that many organizations, charities, where they get their funding from equates to how they respond to certain issues. For example, when Hassan KF was being threatened with being flooded to make way for a dam, and it wasn't just going to be flooded, it was going to be decimated. They were going to fill it with concrete and they were going to destroy the caves, considering Hassan KF had been lived in for over 14,000 years. UNESCO did nothing. They were approached many times and they did nothing. And eventually Hassan KF was flooded, destroyed. All historical artifacts were flooded and destroyed with it. So I think that in terms of observing how certain groups and organizations respond to a situation, we have to consider how they're being funded and what their background is. I'm always happy to speak with Greenpeace. And indeed, you're right, we should try to open up a way of talking to other organizations and finding out whether they're responsive or not. Turkey is a key player for European powers in terms of having a presence in the Middle East. If I have to consider how they're thinking, how European nations are thinking, how the West is thinking in terms of this geopolitically, I would say the reason why not many people are talking about it is to not risk further upset with Erdogan's regime, to avoid tensions. How does one translate the word Nasaqamgiri? Regional dispute. If they were to raise any of this with Turkey, then Turkey would withdraw any support in the Middle East. That means any support they have against Iran, they have any support with any issues they might have with Russia. So the reason why internationally they don't talk about it is predominantly for geopolitical reasons, and to maintain their hand in the region. And indeed, if we can talk to other organizations, that would be a way around it, because it would mean that other organizations are talking about it as a one united voice. However, that might only get us so far. That might only get you international recognition and a greater arena to discuss this on. We also need to be focusing on ways to manage what our intentions are. If we're making relations, if we're making communications with other organizations, we need to have an end goal. We need to have, what are we aiming for? What are we aiming for in terms of international law? What are we aiming for in terms of international protection? What are we aiming for? And those are the things that we need to think about when we make connection with other organizations, which I think is a good thing to start talking about. Thank you for that question.
Thanks, Sonia. We have a question from Felix and then a question from Pinar.
Hello, thank you for those excellent talks. I want to bring a perspective from India, and I've seen my Indian comrade Sharanya has come back. And in some ways, the situation for the Adivasis, the indigenous people in India, is very, very similar to what you've described. It's not as militarized, but it is becoming terribly militarized. But in terms of the dams, I mean, India has over 3,000 mega dams and several hundred more under construction, and the devastation is beyond. That's why, you know, colonialism, the World Bank, the USA, the UK, the vested interests in those dams are not just Turkish and Iranian. It's a model that is not allowed to be questioned so deeply. The same with groundwater. A huge part of India faces the most abysmal danger from groundwater overexploitation, just like you've described in both those regions. And there's nothing being done about it. India's got a very efficient bureaucracy in lots of ways. You know, it's got a much more cohesive bureaucracy than even Britain has, let alone probably Turkey or something. And yet nobody's talking about groundwater. We've also got the mining, and I'm particularly talking about the mining because I would love to know in both the Iranian and the Rojava sides whether there's been much mining, because the mining, one of the main reasons for building big dams is to power metals factories, and few people understand the connection between dams and mining, which are both destructive, but dams destroy much more. But in India, the main movements that Sharanya will be talking from is anti-mining movements, which is bringing in another solidarity. And I think in India, they have a lot to learn from Kurdistan, but also people in Kurdistan from India, so many similarities. So I wanted to give that. And I particularly appreciate how, Munir, you spoke of the Kurdish people as indigenous people, because, you know, the indigeneity is a very controversial topic for reasons we understand too well. But I think it's very important to understand you in Rojava, you do have an indigenous language, culture, way of understanding land that is also there in indigenous people in Latin America or in India. So I wanted to give that as a comment, and any response is welcome.
Pinar?
Hey, sorry for joining a bit late, but thank you for both talks. I also wanted to sort of comment on a couple of things that were asked. For instance, for Greenpeace, it has been discussed for the environmental destruction in the Kurdish lands, and Greenpeace has been criticized in Turkey for not reacting to environmental destruction in the Kurdish lands. And I haven't heard anything, like there have been many forest fires and many environmental destruction, but they have been completely quiet. So I wanted to add that as a comment too. And then I also definitely agree with Sonia that, you know, Turkey's position, not only the things that Sonia has rightfully said, but also with the refugee crisis and how Turkey is holding, around 4 million Syrians and threatening the EU for, opening its borders to let them flow to Europe. And also it amazes me how it's not even, controlling the waters, which is, again, a very geopolitical issue, of course, and it's very highly politicized. But we have seen Turkey's invasion in Rojava, and in such a colonial act, cutting down their olive trees, using their products, just stamping the Turkey, made in Turkey thing on the products and selling it, which is like a perfect example of colonialism, right? And even with that, when it comes to Turkey's offensives as such, it's not really criticized, or it's they just turn a blind eye to it. And I think now with the current Russia-Ukraine crisis, it becomes that, with that KJAR pipeline becomes even more important for Europe. So I think that kind of complex relationship between different nation states in Kurdistan and the Kurdish political actors just makes everything much more confusing. And listening to these two talks today made me once again realize, and I have sent a message to Sonia, it's amazing that we have all of these things repeating itself, ecocide and continuous destruction and criminalization of the Kurdish activists, Kurdish environmental activists, and turning a blind eye to what's happening there. And yet we do not have, I think, one paper, even one academic paper or anything else, as far as I know, that talks about this in all 4 parts of Kurdistan. And I think that is definitely something that we should be doing. We should be producing and making more visible in both the academic world and also to policymakers, to the international audience. I think that is our task. We should be doing something about that. But thank you so much. It's great to know you both. Thanks.
Can't speak on behalf of GreenTress and the work that they do, or perhaps don't do as much of. However, one of the difficulties that we face as the Greater Kurdistan is the fact that we're divided into 4 parts, and we face separate issues politically because of those 4 parts being divided thus. And that means that because it's also such an enormous patch of land, Kurdistan, I would have to focus myself on Rojhelat, and someone would have to focus themselves on Bakur in order to be more efficient. So I can't speak on behalf of GreenTress, but for myself, as I am here today as a speaker for Rojhelat, it's predominantly for that reason, because we face such different opponents. I mean, where Rojhelat faces opposition from Syria and Turkey, my main oppositions are from Iran, Afghanistan, Azeris, Armenia, places like that. So that's, in my perspective, the reason why I focus. It's nothing to do with the fact that we're not united. It's predominantly because we need to manage our resources.
By the way, I know I didn't mean to. I only focus on Turkey as well, personally. I mean, I understand the difficulties. It was just a comment for all of us to, I think, to come together, maybe do something what Stefan did in his edited collection, but in a more, focused paper format or something like that. I didn't mean to, of course. I mean, I understand.
Looks like Estella has a question, and Nick and Stephen.
Well, maybe I only wanted a comment at this stage because I was hoping Nick might contribute to that, or, make the comment maybe first. But politically, we cannot, in my opinion, separate what we are discussing today with the present full-out war that is being waged against the Kurds by Turkey, and the chemical weapons that are being used against the whole of the Kurdish movement. The whole fact is that the Kurdish movement is criminalized in all parts, in all shapes, in all forms. It is part of the global, struggle against terrorism by states, and in particular in the Middle East, which has become the center point, at least at this particular stage, in the wars globally. And we know that the PKK is not separated from when we raised the issue about Iran and the Kolbas and the Kurds. We do know that as part of the past 40 years. It is not something separate. But what we do have to stress is, why have we set this up? Okay, this platform on, a Peace in Kurdistan network on ecology. It is because of the central issue that Öcalan keeps raising, that we have to build the alternatives. So it's not just a question, how do we actually, approach a government or get more articles in the paper, okay? But how do we build the global struggle of peoples who are affected by all these policies internationally. It is a new form of struggle that we have to create. Jeff was just in Kenya, working with the grassroots community on alternatives and bringing this to the attention of the world. Other people have been in other parts of Kurdistan. We have a whole history of experience in the past 40 years. We have been down there when Hasankeyf, before Hasankeyf was, absolutely drowned, okay? We know these past struggles in the 30, 40 years. It has never been separated from the political and decriminalization practices that, that governments were using in Europe, all over the globe against the Kurds. And in this situation now, that is why the discussion is so important. That's why we need to educate people who do not know, where they're prevented from knowing. I mean, we do not even have anybody in parliament at the moment raising the issue because they do not know. They need, the papers we need to produce, the material to present to the public and to get the responses and to create this network internationally, which can bring the right pressure. And using all those platforms, if this is now on the World Social Forum maybe, or wherever else. We've
got about, Isela, we've got about 5 minutes left of the meeting. And I want to make sure that Nick and
I asked to the extent, but I would like to ask, Nick and also maybe, other people to comment, like Connor. I do think we need to discuss that issue, what we actually do, concrete on particular, but in general, the political issues. Okay.
I think that might warrant its own dedicated meeting, perhaps.
Yeah, but we can.
Sorry, can I just hear Nick and Stephen's questions before we do cut off?
Yeah.
Who first? Was it Nick or?
Nick, could you go ahead with your question before we sign off? And then Stephen?
Can we not extend it for 10 to 15 minutes? It would be very useful to hear Okmunda's word and to hear also Jeff with his comments.
Mine was more of a comment actually rather than a question, and it was a comment on a couple of things. I mean, one is on the Greenpeace issue, if you like. I mean, there have been campaigns, some of which have been highly publicized, well known internationally over the last 20 years around water in the Mesopotamian basin and the role of Turkey in cutting off water supplies or using water as a weapon. I mean, most obviously over the Ilisu Dam, which did result in some very strong alliances between environmental groups, human rights groups, social justice groups, ecological justice groups, to stop European funding and US funding of the Ilisu Dam. But and these have borne some fruits. I mean, it's not like we have to reinvent the wheel. The quite strong movement-based fora now that have emerged, like the Mesopotamian ecology movement that Ercan's very much involved with, the Save the Tigris campaign, which actually is about Save the Tigris and Euphrates, but is based very much in Iraq and KRG, some contacts in Iran, and of course contacts in Turkey. And within Rojava, there's the NES Water Forum, which last year held a meeting on precisely these issues. So there are foundations to build on. I wouldn't personally put a great deal of faith in Greenpeace. I think Greenpeace is like many big northern environmental groups, they're sort of one-night stand campaigners. You know, they love something, they get a bit of publicity about, and then within a very short time they've moved on to something else. Which is not to say that they're not raising good, very important issues. I've never found them that loyal allies, but that's my own personal experience. They are part of the soup, the mixture of the soup. So I think there are movements and alliances that are already in existence that we could all be part of and contribute to and help build. And I would really encourage some crossover between this grouping and Save the Tigris campaign, and of course the Mesopotamian ecology campaign. One of the big problems that we faced over the years is that a lot of environmental groups, particularly in Turkey, the moment you raise the Kurdish issue, run a mile. And that is a problem that needs a lot of discussion and a lot of patient engagement. A broader issue, and I think this speaks also to what Estella was talking about, is that, I mean, the issue isn't just Turkey putting pressure on Rojava. I mean, that is clearly the case. But the use of dams and water projects as weapons in that region. And it is also Iran that's doing it. I was up on the border with Iran and Turkey last month and could see the impacts of the Daryan Dam that's under construction in Iran on the water flow near Halabja. I mean, the water was 30 foot down on what it should be at this time of the year. And it is being used as a weapon. Likewise, the KRG is responding to the politics with Baghdad by planning 40 dams in order, quite expressly, that they can put political pressure on Baghdad. So this is also about building movements in the region. And there are powerful movements in Iran, water movements. Massive demonstrations have taken place, heavily repressed, as we heard earlier. But there are movements there to collaborate with and support, and there are movements in Iraq. I mean, there's which are nascent but are being built at a local level, federating themselves and putting some pressure on the Iraqi government, because ultimately a weak government in Iraq means that Turkey can get away with a great deal more. It's not, I mean, Turkey and Iraq have been negotiating water flows for the last 40 years, and the last 20 years have seen Turkey having much more political bargaining power, not least because of the US invasion of Iraq and the consequences of that. So, I mean, I think the task is, of course, international and building international pressure on Turkey, Iran, and those who build dams and use water as a weapon. But it is also primarily about building local resistance and local resilience in the face of water crises. And I think, you know, swapping exchanges on water harvesting, those sorts of techniques, and building linkages between movements is the way forward.
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
Can I just hear what Stephen's got to say, just in case we cut out? Can I just hear what Stephen's got to say first?
Yeah.
And then.
Okay.
Stephen, quickly.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, partly I was going to ask a question about GreenTress, but I suppose in terms of Greenpeace, I think for me, I mean, I was quite involved with Greenpeace probably in the 1990s. And then even at that time, there was a big kind of squabble really between the grassroots campaigning, and it's a very centralized, slightly bureaucratic organization. And I suspect that's probably got even worse now. So certainly as far as I'm aware, these issues aren't, they're certainly not part of public campaigns in the UK, as far as I'm aware. which I think is significant. I think one of the problems with groups like Greenpeace is that they obviously present themselves as non-political organizations, when, as we all know, these are very much political problems. So there's kind of fundamental problems with Greenpeace, unfortunately. And they do, you know, they present themselves as neutral. They're very much driven by fundraising, very much driven by, if you come across Greenpeace now, it's probably going to be somebody tugging your arm in the street to set up a direct debit more than anything. So there's those problems. I think they've got some, you know, real value in terms of their research expertise. That's probably what they've got. They've obviously got a lot of experts, and so in terms of quality of their research, that is something useful. I suppose the other issue with Greenpeace is I don't think they have, certainly speaking from the UK, I don't hear people from those big environmental NGOs really in the media as much as you would have done 20 years ago either. So you know, I don't hear Greenpeace representatives as much on something like the radio stations or in the media. Friends of the Earth or Greenpeace are those kind of organizations. I don't think they have that, unfortunately, as much of a voice there. I don't know whether that's true elsewhere. I suppose the value of the conversation with groups like that is they are very big environmental organizations, and I suppose it's a way, if it's a way of building bridges and introducing those conversations about, well, why have those environmental groups been around for something like 50 years now and failed to have much of an impact in terms of dealing with, you know, challenging some of these appalling situations that we're facing across the planet at the moment. So that's important. But I think as Nick mentioned at a previous meeting, one of the questions here is who do you build alliances with, and how do you take those alliances forward? So I suppose that's something very much that should be part of our conversation, I suggest, within this group. So it might be that this is another conversation for another day. That would be Greenpeace. I suppose, I think actually Connor's also put my question into the chat, and my question was actually probably to the GreenTress representatives, is around, what would be useful in terms of international solidarity? Is it around publicity? Is it around fundraising? Is it around nothing like that, but doing something at our end? Is it around political pressure? I'd be very interested to know what sort of concrete links and practical support, if any, would be welcome from GreenTress.
I think GreenTress is an online. In terms of being able to respond to that, I think that in terms of GreenTress, one of the problems that they face is that their borders are often closed. Peshkabur and the ones further down as well, they're often just closed for months on end, which means resources don't get to them. And not just them as a group, but them as in the whole of Rojhelat. So I presume for them, resources, being able to raise awareness is of course a good thing for any organization, but I suppose resources is also something that they need to be considering.
If I might interject here, I think GreenTress is still online. I've
messaged them twice. I think they might have a bad connection.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
So I sent them 2 direct messages. So hopefully they'll respond before we cut off. But if not, we can email them.
But yeah, so I do know that they would be having issues with resources simply because the borders are often closed by Iraq, by Syria. I think that another thing that we need to discuss here, and just so that it's said and that we're all sort of grasping that, is in terms of nation states, plurality of self is not accepted. That means that multiple identities, multiple individuals, ethnicities, things like that aren't accepted in terms of nation states. And this is predominantly because when one looks at systems of power, you need to consider discourse and how you educate a society towards your belief. If you have multiple beliefs and multiple cultures and multiple languages, then they're less likely to follow a nation state pattern in terms of a societal structure. For this reason, Kurdistan often faces opposition because it is plural, it's plurality. We don't just have one Kurdish speaker. We have Kirmanji, we have Sorani, we have Haurami, we have Zazaki, we have Balochi, we have the Kulhuri. The branches of our languages are broad. You go from village to village and you have different clothes, you have different ways of identifying yourself, but we all identify as one thing, and that's Kurdish under Alay Rangin. Alay Rangin is the colorful flag because we are colorful people. And I understand that in terms of a nation state, they would be unwilling to communicate with us simply because of a prejudice of views. They wouldn't want multiple selves, plurality of the self, to intercept into their methods of power and discourse. And so I think that that's one of the reasons why Kurdistan faces a lot of uphill struggle, is because we're not willing to deviate from our very, very rich culture. We're not willing to dilute it into one tiny little group. Any questions?
Any final questions?
Chef, please. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to follow on a couple of the sentiments. I think Nick also articulated it well, which is thinking about, and it's also in Connor's question. Part of his question is, what can we as a group do to facilitate the kind of connections between movements on the ground? And here I'd like to push Sonia even on this, not only with respect to the question of people reaching out to Kurdistan, but also the Kurdish movement reaching out to other grassroots groups on the ground beyond Kurdistan in the global south. We've heard from India, we've heard from Kenya, we'll hear more from the global south, hopefully. But what can we do as a group to really make these connections more than a webinar? That's really, I think, really incumbent upon us to really begin to ask ourselves, are we doing something that is ultimately just another version of the millions of webinars that are out there? Or are we moving towards trying to figure out ways in which we can be forging effectively coalitions of grassroots organizations pushing for self-determination on the ground and using the ecological issue as a crucial tool for forging those international links? So I think it's an open question, but we really have to ask that at this point, because now this is maybe our 4th, 5th session, and we have to be thinking about what is the purpose of this group.
Agree. I think that we do need to be considering what our goals are going to be for the end of the year, and I would really like to be able to sit down and speak to a handful of people with regards to that. Something that I've found successful in terms of organization and groups is national groups. So for example, rather than one large international group, we can have smaller groups nationally so that we can approach our governments and we can set tasks towards achieving those tasks on a monthly basis. But I think that would need greater discussion. And I think that of course, I would need to speak to Stella about that, and I would need to speak to the Kurdish National Congress and etc. Stella, do you have any opinions on that?
Well, I mean, if I might sort of say, this, this particular series of events that we have planned and we have set up is inseparable to what we do as a whole, as a movement fighting for self-determination and for the implementation of democratic confederalism as a whole. That is what we as an organization are about, to spread the link, not just in terms of information, but wherever we are, even here, to, to make sure that the ideas of democratic confederalism are accepted, okay? Are accepted as an alternative. That's why we are turning, on the one hand, we are turning to here now to, broader groups involved internationally in the struggle for self-determination. We have people here today, okay? I mean, Felix, who is working in India, the Adivasis. We have had discussions with other people in India. We have discussions with people in Mexico, building links all over the globe on these particular issues. And of course, they all, I mean, the ideas, and the only practice where it works is Rojhelat. This is the model. This is the thing where people relate to. And, and we are engaging these people in the struggle, and we can only strengthen it by helping to build this wherever it is possible. The strength, for example, at the moment, what happened in Kenya and, with our friends from the grassroots liberation, is a very, very strong example of this. And these kind of links have to be built, all over the place. We can only do it that in particular area, which helps to publicize the ideas around it and bring it to a broader public. It's not just a question of reaching environmental organizations here or there. It is where are there platforms to really go ahead and make these links, and who are responding to it and building, on the ground and exchanging views on developments, So, it isn't, we have an educational purpose here with this platform, and to develop ideas how we can improve it. I mean, we can discuss this when people, sorry, maybe put in proposals, written proposals, how we could expand that work, how we could, improve it by also having the necessary resources to do it, okay? To win the people who take active part, expand it. So maybe it would be a good idea if people did write something in which we could discuss on the steering group and to develop a program, another program of work on it. So, I mean, could be any of this.
All right, on that note,
anybody else on this? Or is this Connor? Oh, sorry.
We can,
Dana?
Who's that waving their hand?
Dana.
Yet?
Dana.
Yet?
Dana Peach.
Dana Peach. Sorry, thank you. Yes.
I just want to support it. I think we should, everybody of us should, or not should, but could write a few thoughts about the meeting today, not just switch off. So I could do. I'm not an original active member of this group, but I listened to everything, and I just thought it's a broad topic, and I'm willing to write something. I have to, otherwise it's just off. Yeah, and maybe we all could do. And I think a platform, an informal platform where all groups could meet, not to find a political solution, but to find a common sense in how to do works in ecology. I think this is the point. And then let's have a look how it develops. So this would be my idea from all the things I've heard today. And So I will write something, and Estella, you can share it to the group to think on it. Yeah, and I would also read other contributions. I would love to.
Well, I mean, encouragement for written material, which we could publish. After all, we have a website as well. We do publish these things. We have also major interviews of 1 hour with particular groups in different parts of the world. Connor is going to do an interview in the next few days, for example, with people from the Adivasis, you know, which we also publish.
Yes, I know. I follow it. I mean, for the group, internal, just to continue discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, yeah.
Yes.
Fine. It's just if you could send us your proposals. And of course, we will also have this meeting on YouTube, which we are going to spread and we will circulate, by the way. And I hope everybody agrees with it. Okay. Today's meetings, and put it out there to other friends who weren't able to come or new friends. Okay. And invite them. Okay. But we certainly need people who are active, who are doing the job.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. And yeah, let's stay in touch. And yeah, if anybody has proposals like Donna's suggesting or any writing they would like to share with the rest of the group, just yeah, get in touch and send it along, and we'll figure out how the best way to share that is with the rest of the group. Connor, would you like to say goodbye?
Goodbye, everybody. No, thank you very much for joining us today and for a great, lively discussion. And take care, everybody.
Well, can I just say, you know, one other thing? I mean, can we not, the next event will possibly be in 6-7 weeks, by the way. Okay, just to take note of that. Okay, and I'm not sure if Stephen is still here, if he wanted to say a word finally for the next event, just to announce it. Okay, Stephen is still there?
I am still here. Yeah, we talked about agroecology in South America as a discussion. I've been in touch with Les about that, but we've also talked very much about having a session on Africa and particularly Sudan and Kenya. So that would be very valuable as well. So I suggest that we probably get together as a steering group and fix the next date and see where we are with that. I don't know. I think maybe, are you still here, Pina? We've also talked about a session on ecofeminism a little bit later in the summer to tie in with the Women Weaving the World conference as well. So quite a few ideas for future discussions, which I think we'll link on from the discussion today in a really useful way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much to Amba for the brilliant job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Brilliant presentations all around. Really good.
Thank you. Very much welcome, everyone.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
I see you, Connor.
Sure.
A bit later, maybe.
Not
Okay,
here.
sure.
Okay. Amber, thank you very much.
Thank you, Amber.
Yeah, no problem.
All
Yeah,
right.
I'm just saying not here because I have to process the recording, so I need you all to hang up.
Yeah, okay. I hang
Yeah.
up. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.